Hello and welcome to Back of the Nest, the Palace Years. I'm Chris Hambling, and tonight we're looking at season 2010-2011. A little bit of a damp squib of a season, and helping me review it are Mr. Mike Scott.
Hello, Christopher.
Hello. And Patrick O'Connor.
Hello, Christopher.
Back of the Nest, the Palace Years.
Right, gents, here we go. Before we get into the season itself, worth picking up where we left off in the previous episode. If you haven't listened to it already, it is on our podcast feed, of course, where presumably you're listening to this. So we did 2009-10, ending with Palace's administration, and obviously CPFC 2010 announcing that they had reached a deal to secure the ground after the Lloyd's protests on the 1st of June. And setting the scene for what came in this season. So obviously, first of all, there was a lot to do. The squad had been depleted quite substantially. I think that's probably a good place to start, gentlemen, because we lost a lot of the heroes that we talked about at the back end of last season. So Clint Hill and Sean Derry followed Warnock to QPR. Alan Lee was sold to Huddersfield. Johnny Ertel was sold to Sheffield United. Nick Carr sold to Sydney. Matt Lawrence to Gillingham. Darryl Flahaven back to Portsmouth. Who else did we sell? Calvin Andrew was loaned out to Millwall. That's in there as well. But I think that's probably the main one. And obviously, Danny Butterfield went on a free to Southampton. And Stern John was just released. And I don't actually know what happened to him after that. But there we are. So lost a few of the squad and were left with very little. So it meant that Palace had an awful lot of rebuilding to do. And also worth mentioning that in the summer, we'd spoken to Dougie Freedman relatively recently. It's probably about 3 or 4 years ago now. But he talked about how it's not just the on-field staff that we lost. We lost essentially the whole backroom. Obviously, when Paul Hart left. So Dougie was retained. And he ended up coming in and cutting the grass, having to pay for supplies out of his own pocket and all sorts of stuff. So it was really, really, the club was at a low ebb, even though that takeover had happened. So much rebuilding to do. And, well, the first course of action, of course, was to bring in a new manager. And that manager was George Burley, Patrick.
Yeah, I was initially quite excited at the appointment of Burley. Knowing a little bit about him, I know him as a player I played for Scotland, and I actually was able to find some quotes off of the cpfc.co.uk website from Burley. So this is from Monday, June 21st, 2010. Quote, "I am coming back to a division that I know very well, having managed Ipswich, Derby and Southampton. I have been fortunate to have reached 6 playoffs and had success with Ipswich in getting them into the Premiership and finishing 5th. Goes on to say, I've been out of management for the last 6 months after leaving the internationals post with Scotland, which was a great experience. However, I missed the day-to-day involvement when I was with Scotland, and this is a great opportunity for me to be part of that day-to-day involvement again." So he's talking about a manager who was, Scotland manager, managed 3 very decent clubs in Ipswich, Derby and Southampton, and took over a club, which you just stated, Chris, bare bones. We lost some really key players, and people. I understand now why people are upset at Warnock. I'm not as much, but taking Derry and Clint Hill was very big to us. But again, these players had to leave for reasons, financial in part. I remember actually hearing from Clint Hill saying that the government hadn't been paid a lot, so the reason players left. So for someone like Burley to come in, I thought was a very a kind of great catch for CPFC 2010. Unfortunately, it didn't end up that way.
No, absolutely right, and we'll get into that. I mean, I remember Steve Parish talking about the decision to hire Burley, and that obviously there'd been rumours floating around about drinking and all sorts of other stuff. But I think Parish did the kind of thing that you'd expect of someone coming into football who's been used to running a company, and treated it very much like how he would hire someone working for him. And did the relevant due diligence, contacted former chairman, all that kind of stuff, and just got glowing reports. And it really did seem like a perfect fit, if you like, a player, a manager who had, like you say, all that experience, knew the division, but also had a a good reputation for bringing through younger players as well. And I think that's where we were as a club. Because of just how many professionals we lost, we really had to look at the youth system and who was left and see who we could bring through.
My abiding memory at the time was that he had a really, really bad time as a Scotland manager. And the summer felt like it had never end because everything was so up in the air, like you say, and players, no news of whether they were staying or going for a little while, and that summer went on a long time. So at the time, I've just looked back at Burley's record, and he was sacked after a 3-0 defeat against Wales. And so I remember at the time thinking, there's not, we're not in a great bargaining position, but I was a little bit worried. Also, a little stat for the day: he was the first Scottish manager in 86 years for Palace, since the 1925 appointment of Alex Maley, who, for some inexplicable reason, actually has a Wikipedia page, and the man dons a fine hat. That's about all I know about him.
Patrick, do you remember him?
I knew that was coming. I know it. I do not remember him. Sorry.
Fair enough. We'll have to check,
But what was weird was it ended up obviously being, spoiler alert, two Scottish managers in a row. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. I'm going to run through a few of the players that we signed in this period where we really just had to fill that squad. Obviously, gents, I'll give you a chance once I've been through them all to talk about your memories of some of them and what they contributed or didn't contribute to the cause. But obviously, Klein had established himself. We still had Jules in goal, but we brought in David Wright initially, I believe, as a left back before Dougie converted him to a central defensive midfielder. Adam Barrett came in, had an absolute blinder against Chelsea in pre-season and did very little else. We brought in James Vaughan. I think that was a loan, wasn't it? Before we eventually potentially signed him permanently later on in the season. But the hat-trick against Portsmouth, a particular memory there. Later in the year, we brought in Stefan Everson. But start of the season, Owen Garvin joined us, player with a big reputation at Ipswich. Took a while to settle with us before eventually leaving, but was definitely contributed. Andy Dorman. Come on, guys. Andy blooming Dorman. There's a whole thing to talk about with Andy Dorman shortly. Lewis Price came in as sort of backup goalkeeper. Julian Bennett was signed at one stage as give us a fullback option at left back. Brought in Jermaine Easter. Brief spell for Edgar Davids, which we'll talk about as well. Jonathan Obika, the perhaps worst ever loan signing, absolutely terrible. Alex Marrow, who was superb for a very short spell, talked about as potentially, the new Jeff Thomas and all that before fading away. Anthony Gardner, who was a fantastic signing for us, really shored up at the back. Pablo Cunyago, I can never pronounce it properly, also joined us, played for most of the season, scoring a massive 2 goals. Kemi Augustine was a late loan in from Swansea. And of course, it was the season where we signed KG as well. Lots of player names there. Patrick, jump in first.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll skip over the Andy Dorman comment I had in my head. I have to admit, considering it was the scattergun approach, David Wright, Lewis Price, and Anthony Gardner were huge for us the following season in that League Cup run. I mean, absolutely fantastically huge. So it's really strange how when they made up an impact that season, the following year, those 3 were absolutely brilliant for us. So I have to give whoever credit. I guess I'm going to credit various people because some of them came in during Burley and some of them came in during Dougie's reign. But no, those 3 guys in particular did a great job for us the following season. Kudos to them.
Absolutely right. Any favourites in there for you, Mike?
That James Vaughan hat-trick, definitely, but I don't remember him doing too much else. He came down from the Premier League from, who was it from?
Everton.
Yeah, those 3, and then I can't actually remember him scoring more than about 1 more than that, but
I think you're about 7 that season, but Of course, he was the youngest at the time, before I think Rooney broke it. He was the youngest scorer in the top division with a goal against Palace, which is fairly typical of us.
He's still only 30 now, so I mean,
He still plays, doesn't he? I saw him in a Sunderland documentary. He's still playing. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
he's at Portsmouth now. So yeah, that's the abiding memory from the first bit of the season, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, a few players to pick out for me. I mean, obviously Andy Dorman was just. He did score one goal for us in a 4-3 defeat to Preston, and get this right. This shows you what a weird season it was. Andy Dorman scored with a header from a Paddy McCarthy cross. Right?
Sorry,
Just-
I had to laugh.
honestly, that was the season we had. It was absolutely bizarre. Spoiler alert: we finished the season in 20th and didn't get relegated or anything like that, but really didn't put anything like a particularly good run together for quite a while. Spent a lot of time languishing towards the bottom of the table, and we'll talk more about that. I also want to bring to attention the fact that we talked about this before we started the recording, that we actually did blood. Sorry, I forgot to mention Stuart O'Keefe. People will murder me for that, but we brought him in later on in the season. Dougie brought him in from Southend, and obviously a bit of a cult hero at Palace for many. But we did blood some youngsters as well. Last game, second to last game of the season against Hull to secure our safety. Ibra Sakadio, of course, scored on his one and only appearance for us before drifting down the leagues. Nathaniel Pinney, who for quite a while in the under-23s and under-18s kept Wilfried Zaha on the bench, was a fairly chunky striker by that point and went on to become chunkier and lower down in the leagues. But we also, again, the two Kierans, Kieran Cadogan and Kieran Jalali, also featured relatively heavily as youth players, and we'll talk more about those in a sec. But one of the players that I've got a little story about, which I may have told on the show before, was Matthew Parsons. Matt Parsons played as a left back. So a couple of seasons after this, I think a year before he left us, I went to when they used to hold the end of season doing a marquee on the pitch. I went a couple of years in a row. I went there, and one of the years I went, I was with a bunch of people who, let's face it, we were all hammered and having a good time. And one of my friends decided, in fact, two of my friends decided that they would go and on this sort of silent auction put my name down for various sums of money on every single shirt. Which is a hilarious joke, isn't it? A really funny joke. And I was the proud winner of a Matthew Parsons match-worn shirt. Okay, so that's the first part of the story. The second part of the story was when I found out that I had to pay £60 for a match-worn Matthew Parsons shirt. As I handed over the money, I went on a massive long rant about why on earth would I want to spend £60 of my hard-earned money on a match-worn Matthew Parsons shirt. And as I said those words, he was standing directly behind me.
That's fantastic.
And I caught him out of the corner of my eye, and I had to just try and backpedal. And I was like, I mean, I rate him as a player, but I haven't got £60 to spend on a match-worn shirt. And I was just like, I had to sort of do that. But that still, if I think about that, it still keeps me awake. It was.
What did he say?
Nothing. He had to play it cool, pretend he didn't hear, but he heard. I knew he heard. I knew that my backpedaling was of absolutely no use, and it was horrible. A horrible, shameful moment.
Have you still got it, or did you eBay it?
Oh, I eBayed it.
My question exactly.
Later.
Thank you, Mike. eBay.
Well, the good thing was it was a long sleeve. So long sleeve match worn shirts, whoever's name is on it, actually go pretty well. So I think I got my money back for it, which was all right in the end. But
well, I hope he's not listening.
well, if he is, honestly, mate, I thought you were really good, and I'm very surprised you didn't go on to have a more prominent career. I think injuries did take their toll when he went off to I think Barnet and a couple of others. But I thought he was a good player. He was one of those with not a huge amount of talent, but a fantastic attitude towards the game. I think that stood him in good stead. There you go.
Well recovered.
Yeah. Thanks. But come on, mate. £60 for your shirt. You wouldn't pay that. Right, okay. Another one to pick out, obviously. Let's talk a little bit about Edgar Davids. I know it was obviously later, well, not that much later on. It was, I mean, we signed him not having played for a year. Lots of excitement, lots of people buying David shirts. And I think it was the early game against Queen's Park Rangers, wasn't it, that absolutely saw to him. I think we play. When was that? That was not that I'm looking it up as we speak. It was the start of October.
Was that the game where he made a ridiculous error and we lost the game? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
It
that's
was.
Chungy style. Yeah,
We played him at left back, didn't we? That's
yeah.
the first thing that we did, and I think a lot of people are like, well, play him in centre mid, play him in centre mid. So we actually played him in centre mid. Now the unsort spoken story of it was that QPR had Adel Tarapt at that time, who was absolutely brilliant in that division. And Davids actually spent the rest of the game near enough marking him out, barring Tarapt's goal early in the second half. But other than that, he kept him so quiet, did a really good job on him. But the horrendous back pass that actually led to that goal, that's what people unfortunately remember, and that pretty much killed him in a Palace shirt. But we were so excited, weren't we, for that brief period of having a Dutch legend in the team.
How could you not be, though? I mean, Edgar Davids played for Ajax, Milan, Juventus, Barcelona, Inter. The man won back then the UEFA Cup. He won the European Cup. I mean, he's part of one of the best Dutch teams that ever played. Playing with, Koeman and those guys. I mean, and of course, our former manager. I mean, but it was a real shame that it ended the way it ended, because I'm telling you, having Edgar Davids in your team, is, to me, for the 6 matches that it lasted and it was not good, was actually quite a thrill for me as a Palace fan. It really was.
I was going to ask, because I'm not really old enough to remember. How does that compare with Lombardo? I think Lombardo played 20 odd games, I think, didn't he?
I mean, yeah, they're sort of chalk and cheese. I remember Lombardo vividly, and he was a player who joined us and delivered even more than you'd actually expect. It didn't feel real that we'd bought him, but then when we actually saw him play, it was just ridiculous just how much better he was than everybody else. It was only really Matt Jansen, I think, that linked up with him on any kind of level that he was at for a brief spell when the two played together. And and the fact that he then went on and won the league title in Italy, a couple of seasons after, and it was that just shows you what you need to know about Lombardo. But yeah, Davids was not at that sort of level when we got him, and it's a shame because part of me kind of thinks he could have been if things had just gone a little bit different. But I do think the year out from playing was possibly the biggest factor there, because it would have taken him a long, long time to get up to speed, and it was a very physical league. You didn't get a lot of time, and he's something of a bit of a Rolls Royce of a player, really. Didn't suit us at the time, but certainly, something to talk about and reminisce about. And it doesn't feel quite so bad now. You can look back at it and sort of laugh a little bit.
It's interesting. You wonder whoever it was now that you get a 37-year-old join a side. I mean, I don't think that there's the even in the Championship. I don't really think there's the space for that kind of luxury. It's amazing how much football's come on in less than a decade.
Yeah, Mike, that player's coming to MLS now, honestly. So you're absolutely right that wouldn't happen anymore.
Indeed. So obviously we've run through a few of the ins and outs transfer wise, not just at the start, throughout the course of the season, but we were building a squad, trying to get a system going on George Burley. As far as results went, I think we had a shaky start, but the opening game I remember vividly. It was first season for me in the lower tier of the Homesdale Block C at the time, on the stairs by Block B. I'd been in the main stand prior to that and experienced all the glory of that. But in the Homesdale, it was obviously a very different story. And the opening game of the season, you kind of you think that's going to set the tone for you. And we were 3-0 up against Leicester at half time. A certain Wilfred Zaha scoring after 19 minutes from an Alan Lee flick on. And again, I vividly remember that and all the talk, because he had a sub appearance against Cardiff the season before. And he was really lively, really, really quick. You didn't quite see the dazzling skills that we know him for now, but you saw a proper attitude. He was screaming at players for not passing to him, putting himself about, even though he was quite a skinny kid back then, at 16, coming on 17. And for him to start the season, starting up front with Alan Lee was, obviously fantastic to see. And just lifting the ball over the keeper was a really good finish. And we wondered, what on earth have we got here? And we got to find out throughout the course of the next few years. Darren Ambrose scored after that with a typical Darren Ambrose finish. Of course, 20 odd goals a season before. I think he only got 7 throughout the course of the whole season. This year, again, reflects kind of how things went for the club. And then Alan Lee, just before half-time, put us 3-0 up, and we were absolutely dominating. But Leicester did come back into the second half, and by the end of the game, it was only a 3-2 victory. But everyone was really positive, I can remember, after that. We thought, this is great. We've got a proper manager, and we've managed to rebuild the team straight away. So brilliant. Let's kick on from here. And unfortunately, after that, we lost 1-0 to Barnsley, 2-1 to Ipswich, 3-0 to Scunthorpe, which that was a brutal game. Then 3-0 to Reading, consecutive 3-0 defeats. Again, that just brings you right down. But then I think that was when we signed James Vaughan on loan. And in his first game, we took on Portsmouth. And my memories of this game, guys, were pretty strong as well. We had Kieran Jalali on one wing and Kieran Cadogan on the other, with Vaughan up front. 1-4-1, Vaughan hat-trick, with Dan scoring a fairly late penalty. But it was really the two Kierans that lit up that game. Absolutely tore Portsmouth apart. I mean, it was 4 we scored. We could have scored so many more. Cadogan in particular was absolutely outrageous that day. And again, you can't help but get excited at times like that. You've got 2 academy kids playing out of their skin. And you just think, what, again, we've suddenly, we're thinking what we're going to do with this squad to make it better. And all of a sudden, these 2 kids are giving you the answer straight away, but just unfortunately they couldn't sustain it. I know back then, Patrick, it was difficult for you to actually watch games because they weren't on TV much. But I know you nothing makes you happier than seeing young players given a chance, and Birdie did that, didn't he?
Yeah, you were just spot on now. I'm looking through the pictures you're talking about. Your memory's brilliant, by the way, and I don't remember seeing those games, but they did have a highlight show. But because Palace was so low in the division, they didn't really show a lot of Palace highlights. But I do remember seeing a little bit of Jalali and Cadogan. And like you just said, I love, the fact that academy players get the chance. And I understand now why I think we don't get a chance in the Premier League. But I really wish that we'd find a way to because you're talking about their Zaha, Scannell, both Kieran's, and you just mentioned Matt Parsons. You're talking about maybe 7 or 8, 9 players during the course of that season, maybe even 10 that got a chance. And I know it's a championship when you finished, as you mentioned, 20th, but it's a real shame because despite having a really poor season, look at your memory and how you picked out, Wilf Scholl and those 2 doing so well. It's because of, that you can just relate more to those players than you can to others. So it's a shame. I really would love it for us to get more kids involved, but I do understand. But again, you're right. Those Kierans, for that little short amount of time, they were very exciting for me to read about and hear about, not much to see, but it was great to see them getting a chance to play.
Maybe I'm more glass half empty than you guys, but the game that sticks in my memory from that period, and this was after quite a few defeats, was the Millwall defeat at home. And I was actually there with a Millwall fan. That really sucked. But looking down the scores to remind myself, Sefti Kechi scoring the 5th when Derby beat us 5-0. Maybe I just better at remembering the defeats, but
I would believe me. I was getting there. Getting there. I mean that Millwall game really does lead us into our sort of the second part of the season, if you like. But going back to that the Derby game you mentioned there, because of course we'd seen James Vaughan get a hat-trick and we were really excited to see him. We followed it up as we often do when we have a great victory and a brilliant performance. We like to follow those up with 0-0s. So we had a 0-0 against Burnley. But the 5-0 against Derby, Vaughan was sent off after 21 minutes when we were already 1-0 down. But it just absolutely fell to pieces in that game. It was really brutal to watch. And again, followed that up with a 0-0 against Cardiff. Then the defeat I mentioned, the Edgar Davids defeat against QPR. And the first defeat against Millwall, we lost 1-0 with Claude Davis being sent off in the last minute as well, was pretty poor. So by mid-October, we were right down the bottom of the league there and struggling. And obviously, Burley was already starting to feel a bit of pressure, especially after the first Millwall defeat, because fans don't like losing to rivals, and it can really set the tone for how the fans view a manager, as we've seen, the season just gone, of course. So we did sort of pick up an away victory at Norwich. That's when Julian Bennett had come in on loan to help bolster the defence, and he actually got the opening goal there before Anthony Gardner scored the other. So it was a nice 2-1 win against Norwich. Again, green shoots of recovery, but as I mentioned earlier on, we then had a 4-3 defeat to Preston, where Dorman scored his first and only goal for Palace. But again, we seemed to play Preston an awful lot during that period, and we tended to be on the losing side of those games. So again, no real consistent performances other than the consistency of defeats. That was followed by a 3-0 defeat against Swansea, a 2-1 defeat against Middlesbrough. And then just a little boost, just that little something where we got a couple of back-to-back wins just to keep us in the hunt. Ambrose scoring 3 goals in 2 games as we beat Watford 3-2 and Coventry 2-0 going into sort of November. And as you get into November in that division, of course, you're coming into a hectic Christmas period and plenty to do.
And one thing I noticed from the Watford game, because that is one victory that sticks in my head, one of their goal scorers was none other than Jordan Much. I did not remember that at all.
Bloody hell! No, that is something that
Wow.
I can't really cope with. To be honest with you, Jordan Much scoring in a game against Palace, I just don't remember it. Bloody, that's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So, leading up to the game you mentioned, the 3-0 defeat against Millwall, Palace picking up just the one victory, a 1-0 win against Doncaster Rovers, with Pablo Cunyago scoring. But after that, defeats to Leeds, heavy defeat to Forest, a couple of draws here and there, Hull and Bristol City. So we got through the Christmas period, hit the New Year's Day game, Burley under huge amounts of pressure, and a certain Jason Punchin scored a hat-trick and really celebrated a hat-trick as well. And it was in the post-match, basically, that Steve Parish sacked George Burley. That was enough. And if anything, what makes you wonder, the people do question, is Steve Parish really a fan? That shows you that Steve Parish is really a fan, because you're going to sack a manager after losing 3-0 to Millwall. You don't even pause. You're like, right, not having this. He's gone. And he went.
Back of the Nest, the Palace years.
George coming into the club with a few weeks to go, I think, pre-season had started, it was difficult to pick up the pace. So that knocked us back. That knocked us back for 2 or 3 months. In fact, we started okay, but for 2 or 3 months we didn't quite have the players that George wanted or wanted to get in. It was frustrating for him at the time.
I just felt it wasn't working for us, and I felt that George absolutely was going to stick to his principles, and I understood that, but I felt if he did, we'd get relegated.
Well, interesting comments. Dougie was obviously suggesting that George Burley was a little unfortunate, and it took him. He came into the club quite late in pre-season. It took him a while to get used to the pace of everything, but also that he didn't quite have the players he wanted. So few excuses there really for Burley. Parish a little bit more unforgiving in pointing out that George Burley was going to stick to playing how he wanted to play and wasn't going to deviate, and that if that was the way we were going to continue, that Steve Parish felt we were going down. I don't know how I feel about that. I remember it vividly, and I certainly 100% behind the sacking in the wake of what happened against Millwall. And I wouldn't say that George Burley didn't go on to another club after that and achieve great things or anything like that. So there's nothing really to point to that being anything other than the correct decision. But I don't know. I do have some sympathy for the players' situation around players, because we went and signed plenty of players after replacing Burley, many of whom made quite a difference. And like I said before, there were some games throughout the Burley period that I thought we played some incredible football. And if we could just kept that standard in every game, which is obviously a huge ask, but I genuinely wonder what could have been, I suppose.
My recollection at the time was that I thought, virtually anyone, it was decent to watch, but virtually anyone could have sort of shored up the defence a little bit more. So I was fairly happy. And looking at it, Burley never actually went on to really do anything else. It looks like he's been retired since very soon after that. So whether the Scotland thing never quite left his memory, I don't know. But at the time, I was very happy. And obviously, as Palace fans, we always have that weird thing where we sort of have this addiction to getting old players back in the frame all the time. And when it was Dougie announced, then I was over the moon. I listened back recently to what Paris said, how he got the job. And it didn't sound as though he was by any means the first choice, but he sort of talked his way round. He said he spoke to him for 3 hours and persuaded him that he was the person that knew the squad and knew what to do with the tools that he had. So,
Yeah, for me then and now, I just don't have a problem when managers leave, except that they leave, for greedy reasons. I just try and look at the circumstances that surround the leaving and then look at the fact that, if things aren't going right, you've got to make a change of some kind. And a lot of times, you talk about that new manager bounce or whatever. And like I said, as long as the reasoning is, in this case, we just things weren't working. And I think Mike make a great point. I think Scotland really jaded Burley. I think the experience of not doing well there tried to make it to go over at Palace. He had the right intent, but, coming in the circumstances he had, it was going to be difficult for him to hang in there. And again, that loss to Millwall was just a death knell for him.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, on the subject of Dougie taking over, I can remember the sort of debates we were having on the Homesdale.net message board at the time. And I vividly remember posting almost wearily, we might as well just give it to Dougie. He knows the squad. He wants the job. If we bring someone else in, it's likely, he's going to have to leave the club. And he's made all these sacrificed the last year or two of his playing career to come back and help out Palace when we were in a dire situation. And it just felt like the right thing to do for me because, how could he do a worse job than what we'd just seen? So I think for me, it was almost a no-brainer. I don't know who the other candidates were, but and as it panned out, it was a turning point in our history.
It's funny you say that, Chris, because I want to go to a couple of quotes that Burley made about Freedman the day he was named back in 2010, June. He says, "At the moment, we have got no coaching staff at the club, and I was very fortunate that Dougie has agreed to join me as he has a lot of knowledge of this club. It's fallen into place very well. I remember Dougie as a player, and he played against me numerous times. He's a very clever, enthusiastic, intelligent person on the coaching side, and last season he and Paul Hart did a fantastic job in keeping the club in this division, so I was very pleased with that. He knows the players inside and out, and that will be a great help for me." And as you just said, he ended up being a decent manager. So I even barely recognize that. That's very interesting.
and one more thing on Burley, he actually just about out of any manager other than the odd caretaker, any manager in recent years, and obviously let's ignore Frank de Boer, did end up with the lowest win ratio. So, in times like these, you wonder if he'd have even got as long as he did. If it had been this season and he was managing, I don't think he'd have lasted as long as he did.
No, you're probably right. And again, it's always, I just remember feeling slightly different at the time. I suppose perhaps it didn't have the kind of intensity that we have now, being a Premier League club. And, the degree of scrutiny on every single minute of every single game. I think back then it was, again, it's still a results business, and the bottom line is the results weren't up to it. So, look, we'll get into the second half of the season, but there was also something else that happened at the turn of the year of 2011, and I'll be removing my headphones for the upcoming clip. We launched a certain little show, live show, called Homestyle Radio.
Hi, and welcome to Homestyle.net Radio, the Palace show available for free worldwide, both live and as a podcast shortly after the show is finished. My name is Chris Hamblin, and with me once again are Ben Nagel.
Hello.
And Ferhad Zaidi.
Hi, everyone.
As always, we'd appreciate you getting in touch throughout the show, and you can do that in a number of ways.
Back of the Nest, the Palace years.
So I hope you enjoyed that little clip down memory lane. Mike, when did you start listening to Homestyle Radio?
I very rarely listen to live stuff, I've got to say. At the time, I was addicted to the forums on homestyle.net, but I don't think I started until, certainly the Premier League era. So I apologise profusely for that.
That is upsetting. How about you, Patrick? When did you start delving into what we did?
I'm going to say the season that we got to the League Cup semi-final. So the next season, 2011-12.
Well, there you go.
Maybe your second year, right? Probably.
Yeah, you got proper vintage. I'll let you off.
Yeah,
a bit upset with Mike.
Definitely that. Remember, you have to understand, getting Palace information in this country is very difficult. So when I found you guys and I found the other chaps I won't mention, it was great to hear fans of my favorite team talking about Palace, and then I got interactive on Twitter and joining the show, etc. So no, it was a godsend. It really was.
As I say, at the time, I was working in Alders in Croydon, which obviously had Palace shopping. It was the only other place you could get any Palace stuff from, and the staff there, to a person, were Palace fans. So it was sort of back in the era where actual chatting and word of mouth and things like that happened. It's nice.
Oh yeah, face-to-face interactions and stuff. Well, yeah, crazy, isn't it? Absolutely crazy to think about them. Well, the opening lineup was me, Ben Nagel, and Ferhad Zaidi. It was. I'll tell you, it was a very interesting experience. I still think it was about 8 hours' notice that I was going to be presenting. Someone else was supposed to be presenting. But very, very much glad that we got into it. And look how far we've come, eh?
How far indeed.
Yeah. But anyway, can't be too self-referential. Let's go on with looking at the 2010-2011 season. We've talked a lot about the blooding of youth and all that kind of stuff, but I just want to get into the results after Dougie took over, because you're hoping, obviously, for something of a bounce after the 3-0 defeat against Millwall. And we did straight away. We signed Stefan Iversen, formerly of Tottenham, a big Norwegian striker, and he scored what I remember to be a very fine header against Preston to win us the game 1-0. And again, you just immediately start dreaming as a Palace fan. But Iversen was an interesting player. I don't know what your memories are of him. Mike, is he a player that you admired from afar at Spurs and were quite surprised we got?
I absolutely loved him. I didn't know a great deal about him before he came to Palace, but he's definitely one of my abiding memories. I didn't remember that header, I've got to say, but I did rewatch it the other day, and he was great, wasn't he? I don't know if he's still playing or not.
I think he was about 70 if he wasn't. That's a slight exaggeration, but I would assume 42. He's long retired. I think 42. I think he went back to Rosenborg, didn't he? Anyway, probably not the time to start thinking wistfully about Stefan Iversen's later career. But that new manager bounce didn't last too long. We lost 3-0 to Swansea in the next game, and it would take until the 5th of February in a 1-0 victory against Middlesbrough for us to get another win. But then we started picking up wins here and there. Beat Sheffield United 1-0. There was a very interesting game where we beat. We drew 3-3 with Reading, which I vividly remember that because we started with an Ambrose goal in the first minute and just went 2-0 up from Neil Dans, and then Jimmy Kebe, remember him? Started to really inspire Reading. And that horrific individual, Shane Long, scored first. Then it was Kebe himself. Then poked our noses ahead from Jermaine Easter before ex-Palace youth Stephen Hunt. It was Steve Hunt at the time. It was Noel Hunt who went and played for Reading after that, his brother. But yeah, Steve Hunt made it 3-3, but a very entertaining game. And that's where we started to play some decent football. And it became relatively enjoyable to start watching Palace again.
I think one thing we haven't mentioned, this is probably quite a lot to do with it, is Dickachoy coming in as well. And I think he did score before the end of the season as well.
Yeah, when we beat Cardiff 1-0, I remember KG scoring in that game. Yeah, and he made a huge difference to us. I think he'd built something of a decent reputation and was linked with some bigger clubs the season before. I don't know if it was, I assume it was a World Cup he played in or something like that. But I remember us being linked with him, and it'd been. I think we got it for something like 400k in the end, which was a fantastic deal. You think about what he contributed to the club. Yes, he got a little bit chunky at times, but he was an excellent player. And I think most people's favourite moment from him might well be the pass for Zaha second against Brighton, maybe in the playoffs, but contributed massively in plenty of games.
I remember at the time it was quite big because the South Africa World Cup had been in 2010, and he'd featured for the South African national side. So it felt like it felt to me at the time like we were sort of getting back on track after the administration to pull that off, because you're right, there were various other clubs interested in, and I would say probably I can't think of a Palace fan that wouldn't have anything other than fond memories of him.
Yeah, my favourite memory, actually, Chris, because I saw it, it was a Friday evening game against Charlton, the goal that he scored. And then celebration runs to the side and does a weird little dance in the corner. That's my memory of KG. I think it was the same season that the Brighton playoff. It was just the beat Charlton and for him to score was actually quite brilliant.
We'll talk about it in a future episode of Back to the Nest, the Palace years, of course. But I will give my story from that Charlton game. I'll do it now. Because not just because we desperately need content, but because it's in my brain. That game it's one of those. So during this period, I'd really got into. I mean, I'd been going to games regularly as a season ticket holder, but I got into away games quite a lot. The season after this, I think I did it's the season after this that I did every single game home and away for the whole season. And I'll be honest with you, I was drinking very, very heavily at the time. How on earth I did the show, I have no idea. Because I guarantee you this now, if you were to listen back to it, there are games where I'm talking about the match and I have actually got no memory whatsoever from being completely blackout drunk. And I have no idea how we managed, but we did manage. But the Charlton game was one where one of those days where you sort of meet up with a bunch of other random Palace fans. It was in the Barrow and Banker at London Bridge. And we just seemed that everybody turned up there. We completely took that pub over. It ended up, spilling out onto the paths outside. There was sort of queues of people down the street, and it was just absolute carnage in there. And I had a profile picture on Facebook for years from it. I was in the middle looking really angry and confused. There was mate Liam wearing my glasses. There was a very confused looking Mark Ross and a very young looking Ben Nagel all in the picture, and it was just brilliant times being a Palace fan. It didn't really matter about the results. It was we're just enjoying ourselves. But and I remember this is where my memory starts to get really, really, really hazy. So I've only got second-hand information about this. But once we travelled to Charlton's ground, we went to a pub near the station, and again, just absolutely took it over. So apparently I got up on a table, and there was some netting at the top on the ceiling of the pub, and I pulled it down. And as I pulled it down, I jumped back off the table, and a cowboy hat basically fell out of this netting and landed in my hands. And without pausing and without looking, I frisbeed it across the whole pub. And apparently, according to my mate, I frisbeed it directly onto a man's head. And he proceeded to jump around celebrating, having had no idea where this cowboy hat he was wearing came from. And my mate said it's one of the funniest things he's ever seen. And I just didn't know that I'd done it at all. And I was completely oblivious to everyone celebrating. Didn't know why. But good memories, really. Let's say back then it was just so much fun supporting Palace. Just a little diversion.
We're not advocating drinking to excess at all.
No. And just to emphasise that point, I now have hypertension and type 2 diabetes as a direct result following Palace every game home and away for the best part of 2 years. So I definitely don't advocate it. Anyway, so we're pretty close to wrapping this up. So we'll just get into the handful of the last few games, which is really a win against Leeds and that draw against Hull that kept us up. And then we'll pretty much draw it to a conclusion. Have we got any old tweets or best and worst memories, the two of you?
Yes, again, there's not a great deal of Facebook and Twitter to go back on from this era. Although I reckon by about 2 episodes more, we should get to the era of social media and people having comments. But the one thing I did pick up on was a Facebook post from myself in 2011, holding a Palace Ale, and Palace Ale was launched in 2011, and there's now. Yeah, I think I put something like beer and Palace, two of my favourite things, have finally come together. And it has become a staple to the point where I can't remember a time before Palace Ale and before £4 pints. So, yeah.
Right, we'll definitely talk about that. Patrick, what you got?
I specifically remember the Hull City match back then. Best way to follow Palace was on the BBC shortwave, and for some reason that match was the commentary the second half. And I remember when Cage's goal was a very late goal, wasn't it, or middle to late? So I went absolutely crazy in my house. My wife was asking me what was wrong with me. So I remember that game and that goal particularly. I just went absolutely nuts. I knew it kept us up that year.
Ah, great. All right. Well, I'll throw to you as we talk about that, and then Mike will end on your tweet, and we'll talk a little bit about the lack of social media again, and then we'll bring it to a conclusion. I'll try and think of something to say in the meantime as well. But hang on, I'm just going to have a quick look through Cup. Losing on penalties to Portsmouth, that's probably not worth. Zaha's first red card. Interesting. No, all right. We'll just round it to a conclusion. Okay. Right, so we're getting to the end of the season now. Obviously, Dougie's limping us home. Let's face it, we had defeats against Scunthorpe, a draw against Doncaster. Going into the 3 last games, we had Leeds, Hull, and Nottingham Forest, and really needed to pick up at least 4 points. Beat Leeds, very early goal from Neil Dans, who was then sent off in the 8th minute of extra time, if you can believe it. But that was a vital victory, and that really set us up for something special. But really low on players going into the Hull game, and early on, Anthony Gerrard put Hull 1-0 up in the first half, and Palace were struggling a little bit and just really had to have a late rally. And Patrick, they had a late rally.
Yeah, I've noticed that Eva Cage is the same age as my son, born in 1992, which is amazing. It's the same age as Wolf also. So on that day, for some reason, BBC 5 Alive had that Hull's Palace match as the second half commentary. So the best way for me to follow Palace back then was via the radio. So I'm listening to the game, and it's very late in the game, and all of a sudden we score that goal. According to this, it's the 88th minute equalizer, and I went nuts in my house, jumping up and down, and my wife didn't understand why. I said, Palace is going to stay up. And she says, and I said, she goes, why? I said, well, I think we're going to get a point today. And then obviously game ends and we stay up. And it was just an amazing moment. And I've been through so many relegation with Palace. I really have been through way too many. It was really a great feeling that day when they were able to stay up. So that was one of my biting memories of that entire definitely season.
I remember it feeling, again, I remember not being at the Hull game and being annoyed that I couldn't go. But it was comparable in terms of the relief when the goal went in to the Sheffield Wednesday game. It's not quite
exactly
intense,
a year before.
But yeah, in terms of the celebrations, that was the moment of the season where it was the relief. We weren't going to drop down a division. We could build again for next year. We had Dougie as a manager, and at the time we were, let's try and keep a manager for God's sake for some period of time. Spoiler alert, we don't. And it just, it felt very, very good. And the fact it was this young lad on his debut, I remember he basically wandered off the bench, got involved a little bit, but I don't know if it was his first touch. I think it actually was, but it was only a couple of yards out from the goal line, but he just smashed it in the net. ran off going absolutely insane. And it's a shame he never went on to play any meaningful games for us after that, unfortunately. But still a great moment for him, and probably one he looks back on with a lot of fondness.
The last game I got to see that season was the Leeds game, and that, in my mind, is Neil Dan's, like that's the career defining game. That amazing tackle that got him the red card at the end of the game. So for the whole game, I was on tour, and sort of back in those days, I didn't have an internet connection on my phone, so I don't know, it was on the M1 or something. So I didn't find out until the radio gave the update, that we were safe at the end of the game, and being with a bunch of people from Brighton at the time, including Brighton and Hove Albion fans, I was happy in the van, and nobody else gave a flying toss. Yeah, that was just that kind of memory makes you think that it wasn't that long ago that it was a lot harder to follow Palace than it is now.
I know. Can you imagine it, kids, not having internet on your phone and having to listen to the radio to know what happened with Palace? Unbelievable, isn't it?
I want to qualify. It wasn't BBC 5 Live. Actually, it was BBC World Service, which is a little different. They take the feed from BBC, but they go into like different matches. And for some reason, they switched to the Palace match right as he scored that goal. So that's what it was. That's why it was so exciting for me, yeah.
There's a bit of luck there for you as well. But good old BBC World Service, eh? But no, look, brilliant times. And it didn't feel any less real or intense when you were forced to listen to stuff on the radio or watch an entire game on teletext. We've all been there. Remember that? Page 302.
Teletext.
And then, just sitting there waiting for a goal to go in and running around the living room because some pixels changed on the screen. You don't know you're born, kids.
I know. They have no idea. They're so spoiled nowadays. They really are.
I was young when I started doing this show. Listen to me now. Talking of the lack of social media and all that kind of stuff, Mike, take us back to the one and only memory you're bringing up from the social media days back then.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you a bit of a hint behind the scenes for these Palace Years pods, the plan was to find tweets and Facebook posts of anger and stuff we could joke about and read out. It really turns out that Twitter was not popular then, and Facebook seemed to have archived a lot of their stuff. So I've had to resort to looking at my own statuses. And April 2011, I posted a picture of me with a beer in my hand, pointing out that Palace and beer, two of my favourite things, had finally come together, and Palace Ale was available. So I know it seems like Palace Ale has been here since the dawn of time and is the staple £4 pint. But previously to that, we could not drink Palace Ale. And I remember getting it and thinking, I don't even really like this, but I'm going to make myself like it. And I still choose it as a beer now, just because it's 50p cheaper than San Miguel. So, yeah.
And let's not forget as well, there's a huge contribution that Steve Browett made to the club in making sure we actually had beer to drink rather than worn bottles of Carlsberg.
Yeah.
And, they weren't much cheaper. I think it was £4 for a warm bottle of Carlsberg, and it was offensive. So,
yep.
So for me, the biggest thing to take away from this season is we went through a horrible period, but we ended up, we had a club, and the rebuilding that had to get done, it really comes down to a handful of individuals. You're talking specifically Dougie Freedman mucking in the summer, but where there was just nobody else about. There were no staff. There was barely any players. There wasn't a groundsman to do the mowing, so he did it himself. Those kind of people are what make a football club and what kept us going. And the fact that we then built a squad and we overcame adversity, and one of our own then took charge and used the young players and built a squad and built a team that actually stayed in the division with a game to go. And even though the last game of the season was horrific against Forest, we'd done the job we needed to do, and it gave us that opportunity to go into the summer, get things in place and start building a proper infrastructure around the club, which led to our later success and eventual promotion back to the Premier League, where we remain to this very, very day at the time of recording. So I personally would sum up that season as a very, very important transitional season for us, where a huge amount of work was done. that we continue to benefit from this day. So thank you very much for listening. And obviously we'll be back very soon with season 2011-12 and more. Subscribe to our podcast on your chosen podcast feed. There'll still be Love Sport shows throughout the summer, as well as a couple of these a week as we move forward. Thank you very much for your time. Cheers. Bye.
Back of the Nest, the Palace Years.